Frank did not ask for special treatment. He only wanted to get home. But as he stood at the boarding gate, clinging to his worn backpack, something felt wrong. The airline staff spoke in hushed tones. Passengers glanced at him, then quickly looked away. Moments earlier, Frank had been humiliated, publicly, needlessly, by the very people entrusted to serve him. He was not just ignored, he was dismissed. And no one said a word. But then, something changed. A voice rang out from the cockpit, calm, commanding, and laced with emotion. The captain had seen everything, and what he did next would silence the crowd, stop the boarding process, and bring a plane full of strangers to their feet. You will not believe what happened on that flight, and why it still haunts the crew to this day. Frank Delaney had served 2 tours overseas, but nothing prepared him for the silence he faced that morning at Gate C-17. After 32 years in uniform, most of them spent helping others stand tall, he found himself shrinking into a corner, unseen, unheard, and unwanted. Not by enemies on a battlefield, but by the very people he had protected all his life. The moment began quietly. Frank approached the boarding desk early, as instructed. His knees were not what they used to be, and pre-boarding for veterans was a small courtesy that made a big difference. He gave the agent a nod, produced his boarding pass, and waited. But the smile never came. Instead, the attendant waved him off. "Pre-boarding is for priority passengers only," she said, eyes already fixed on the next traveler. Frank opened his mouth to explain, but the words caught in his throat. Not because he was unsure, but because he had felt this before. That invisible wall, the one that rises when people decide you do not matter. He stepped back. Others boarded. No one asked him what happened. At that moment he could have turned around and gone home. But this was not just about missing a flight. This was about dignity, about being seen, about the weight of 1,000 quiet battles he had fought, not for medals, but for moments like this, where someone might simply say, "We remember." That acknowledgement never came at the gate. But someone else had seen it, and that someone was wearing 4 stripes. High in the cockpit, the captain had watched everything unfold. The way Frank stepped aside, shoulders heavy. The way the crowd surged forward, pretending not to see the man who once stood between danger and their freedom. And in that moment, the captain made a decision that would change the course of that entire flight. Now ask yourself, why would a seasoned airline captain halt boarding mid-process, delay takeoff, and come out in front of a full cabin to address one single passenger? Because what happened next is not just about one man being wronged. It is about what happens when someone finally chooses to make it right. You see, we often speak about honoring veterans through words, flags, or ceremonies. But those things are easy. The hard part is what happens in the unspoken moments, when no one is watching, and doing the right thing is not convenient. On that day, one decision turned passive observers into active witnesses, and a moment that could have been quietly forgotten became something no one on that plane would ever stop talking about. But here is the question that keeps circling back. Was it too little, too late? Because as the flight continued, new tensions emerged. Not everyone on board agreed with the captain's bold move. A few passengers were openly annoyed. Some complained to the crew, others whispered in frustration, treating Frank's recognition as an inconvenience rather than an honor. So what do you do when standing up for someone starts to divide the room? And what does it say about us, about our values, when a simple act of acknowledgement becomes controversial? That flight was supposed to last 2 hours. But for Frank, it stretched a lifetime of memory and emotion across every mile. He sat in silence, unsure whether to feel grateful, embarrassed, or simply exhausted. But then, near the end of the flight, something happened that even the captain did not expect. A gesture, quiet, unscripted, and absolutely unforgettable. We are not here to sell you a fairy tale. What happened to Frank Delaney is not a headline. It is a mirror, one that asks each of us, Would we have done anything differently? Would we have noticed? Would we have spoken up? Or would we have looked away like everyone else at gate C-17? The stakes are not just about how one man was treated. They are about how we choose to treat anyone who carries the quiet weight of sacrifice. They are about whether we are still capable of reverence, not the performative kind, but the kind that costs us something. And perhaps most importantly, they are about what it means to truly see someone before it is too late. You will soon find out exactly what the captain did. You will hear what happened inside the cabin. You will witness the fallout, the confrontation, and the choice that split the flight in two. But not yet. Because before that moment arrived, one final, devastating truth came to light, something Frank had not told anyone until that very day. And once you know it, you will never forget him. Frank Delaney adjusted the straps on his worn-out backpack and stepped forward when the gate agent called for pre-boarding. His boarding pass was ready. His ID was tucked inside the front pocket. He moved slowly, favoring his left knee, the one that never fully recovered. The agent barely looked up. Pre-boarding is for priority passengers only. Frank blinked. But she had already turned away. He took a step back. Said nothing. Behind him, a businessman sighed loudly and pushed past. A young couple followed, eyes fixed on their phones. One by one, they filed through the gate like nothing had happened. Frank stayed where he was, his hands stiff at his sides. He looked down at his boots. Same pair he had worn on the tarmac the day his last tour ended. He had promised himself he would retire them. But something about them felt familiar, solid, honest. He waited until Group B was called before boarding. Inside the plane, the overhead bins were already full. Frank did not argue. He slid his bag under the seat in front of him, knees pressing into the tray table, a middle seat. Not ideal, but he had learned to adapt. That was what you did when comfort was never an option. The flight attendant offered the usual smile, but it vanished the moment she glanced at his ticket. "Sir, you're not in this row," Frank nodded. "Just trying to make space. My knees," she pointed. "Please return to your assigned seat." He obeyed. People watched, but nobody said a word. In seat 21B, Frank folded his arms and stared at the window, even though there was nothing to see. His thoughts flickered, faces of friends long gone, echoes of orders once barked across enemy lines. And now, silence. He was not angry. He was tired. But someone else had seen it. A steward at the front of the plane. Then the co-pilot. And finally, the captain himself. A quiet conversation unfolded behind the curtain. Papers were passed. A headset lowered. And then something rare happened. The cabin intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain began, "before we depart, I need to share something important." Voices dropped. Heads turned. There is a man on this flight who deserves more than just our attention. He deserves our respect. Frank froze. He has served this country in ways most of us will never understand. And today, he was ignored. That is not who we are. The cabin fell into silence. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, we see you, and we thank you. If you are willing, I would like to invite you to sit up front, in the seat reserved for our airline's guests of honor. There was no applause, not yet. Just stillness. Frank did not move. He had not asked for this. He had not expected it. And for a moment he did not know what to feel. Pride, embarrassment, grief. The attendant returned, eyes softer now. She held out her hand. This time, Frank stood. He moved past rows of strangers. Some lowered their eyes. A few nodded. One young man placed a hand over his heart. And yet, not every face held warmth. A passenger near the exit rolled her eyes. Another whispered something sharp under his breath. Someone pulled out their phone, not to record a tribute, but to scroll past it. Frank felt all of it. He sat in the upgraded seat quietly. No words, no smiles, just the dull hum of engines preparing for takeoff and a storm of old memories catching up to him at 30,000 feet. Frank sat in the front row seat, shoulders stiff, hands clasped tightly on his lap. The leather felt new beneath him, too polished, too soft. It did not belong to him. Not really. A bottle of water was offered. He took it, but did not drink. Around him, murmurs swelled. Who is he? Why did he get that seat? Probably some stunt. The words were not loud, but they were sharp. They cut through the cabin air like blades. Frank heard them all. One man, a few rows back, laughed under his breath. Must be nice to play the veteran card, another voice followed. Bet he did not even see real combat. Frank's fingers curled tighter around the water bottle. He could have turned around, could have spoken up, could have listed the years, the deployments, the scars that were not visible. But he did not. He had never explained his service to strangers before. Why start now? He closed his eyes. And then the moment came. The same flight attendant returned, shifting uncomfortably. Mr. Delaney, I am sorry, but there has been a change. The seat up front, apparently it was assigned to another passenger before boarding. There was a mix-up. Frank stared at her. I'm afraid we will need to move you back to your original seat. Pause. Long enough for everyone nearby to hear. The businessman across the aisle lowered his magazine. A woman beside the window leaned in, watching. Frank looked at the captain's seat, still warm from where he had just been invited, still waiting. He did not argue. He stood slowly, knees locking in protest, grabbed his pack, turned. No honor guard. No salute. Just the cold shuffle back to 21B, while whispers followed him like a shadow. Someone snickered. Another passenger shook their head. The young man who had placed his hand over his heart earlier? He looked down now, silent. The seat was still there, middle, cramped. His knees met the tray again. He sat, said nothing, but something had shifted. He felt it in his chest. Not the pain of rejection. He had lived through that. Not humiliation. He had seen worse. It was something else, a kind of invisible erasure, like he had never been called forward at all. The plane began to taxi. The captain did not speak again. The lights dimmed, and the hum of engines filled the cabin. Outside the window, the tarmac, blurred, then disappeared as the aircraft lifted into the sky. Frank stared straight ahead. He had not asked to be honored. But once they did, once they saw him, they could not unsee him. And yet they had. People settled into movies. Snacks were passed around. Laughter returned, but not to Frank's row. He sat in stillness, staring at the seat in front of him, where someone else leaned back with ease, unaware of what had just been undone. Whatever had begun as a moment of dignity had ended in quiet dismissal. And still, Frank did not speak. But deep inside, beneath the layers of discipline, beneath the years of silence, a storm had begun to rise. This was no longer just about a seat. This was about what it meant to be seen, and then unseen. And before this flight would land, someone else was about to feel the weight of that mistake. 30 minutes into the flight, the intercom crackled. At first, no one paid attention. Just another altitude update, they assumed. But then came the voice, clear, firm, unshaken. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I need to make something right. Frank looked up. I was made aware that earlier today, a gentleman was invited to sit in a seat of honor. And then, through a series of miscommunications, was asked to return to coach. That gentleman is Mr. Frank Delaney, a decorated veteran of the United States Armed Forces. The entire cabin fell silent. Mr. Delaney, if you are listening, and I know you are, I want you to know something. That seat was not just a mistake, it was a missed moment. And this crew, myself included, refuses to let that moment slip away unnoticed. A beat, then footsteps, deliberate, echoing. The cockpit door opened, and the captain stepped out. He did not smile. He did not pause. He walked the narrow aisle until he reached Frank's row. The captain stood tall. Then, without a word, he did something that stopped every heartbeat in that cabin. He saluted. Right there, in the aisle, before all eyes, a full formal salute, earned, not gifted. Frank froze. The bottle in his hand trembled, his eyes locked with the captain's. No theatrics, no microphone, just respect. Raw and personal. One by one, passengers stood, some with hands over their hearts, some in silence, some in tears. The young man from earlier wiped his eyes. The businessman who had scoffed now looked away, ashamed, and then the captain spoke. Not to the passengers, but directly to Frank. You may return to your seat of honor if you choose, but whether you do or not, you are seen, and more importantly, you are remembered. Frank did not move for a moment, then slowly he stood. He did not need the seat anymore. He had already received what he came for. Not comfort, not attention. Dignity. He nodded, steady but quiet, and the two men exchanged a look that said everything words could not. And when he turned, returning once more to his seat, the aisle cleared without a sound. No applause, no announcements, just reverence. The plane flew on, but something had shifted in the air. Frank looked out the window, eyes glinting in the fading sunlight. Not all wounds bleed, not all battles are visible, but when they are acknowledged, healing begins. Frank never asked for a spotlight. He wore his silence, the way he once wore his uniform, with quiet discipline and a deep understanding that some honors are not spoken. They are lived. That is what made what happened on that flight so unforgettable. It was not about a seat. It was never about legroom or upgrades or aisle versus window. It was about dignity. In a world rushing to the next moment, where heads stay down and empathy often feels optional, Frank's story reminds us that silence can be loud, and sometimes it takes only one voice to make the noise stop. The captain did not offer pity. He offered respect. He did not correct a policy. He corrected a moment of humanity that had gone missing. That difference matters, because gestures, when made from the heart, can rewrite pain into peace. And that day, passengers learned something no airline brochure could teach. Dignity is not given, it is restored. We all pass strangers every day, on sidewalks, in stores, in waiting rooms. We assume stories. We fill in blanks. But Frank Delaney's story is a reminder to pause before judgment and act with intention before it is too late. Because people remember pain, but they never forget kindness. Frank walked off that plane carrying no luggage, but something far heavier, the memory of what it felt like to be seen again, and the rest of us were left with a question. When the moment comes, will we be the silence or the voice that breaks it? Respect is not owed because of medals or uniforms. It is owed because behind every quiet figure, there may be a history we do not understand, but can still choose to honor. Frank's flight landed. The cabin emptied. But for those who watched, the captain's salute, something stayed with them. Not guilt, not pity, but clarity. One man was almost erased. Another chose to make him visible again. And in that space between dismissal and dignity lives the difference between forgetting and remembering who we are. So the next time you see someone sitting alone, looking down, or waiting without complaint, remember Frank, and remember this. Honor does not need a stage. Sometimes it just needs someone to stand